And so hello again, everybody, and welcome to our Threading Change webinar. My name is Naomi. I am the coordinator for the Institute of Urban Ecology here at Douglas College. And before we started, I just wanted to acknowledge that Douglas College is located on the traditional unceded territories or the stolen lands of the Katzie, Kakite, Kwantlen, Coquitlam, and Musqueam First Nations, and we are very honored to be able to be situated on these lands with them. And this week was a very special week for us here at Douglas College as we celebrated our first ever Waste Reduction Week in conjunction with Circular Economy Month Canada, which is now the month of October. And so we started the week off with a couple of documentary movie nights, and we had a book display in our library as well. Yesterday was our Clothing Find It to Fix It event in the main concourse at New Westminster. And now today, I'm super excited to be able to wrap up Waste Reduction Week with you and our guest from Threading Change, Sophia Yang. And before I hand it over to Sophia, Threading Change is a youth-led, justice-oriented global organization created to address the systemic injustices and inequities that persist in the global fashion industry today. And even better, it was started right here in Vancouver. And so I am going to go ahead and turn my screen and my microphone off. Again, just a reminder, if you have questions, hit that raise hand or pop them into the chat and we'll address them when it is appropriate. And so, Sophia, I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really nice to see all of you virtually. Everyone can hear me okay? Yes? Okay, great. I'm just going to go into present mode and share my screen. So give me one moment. Okay. Is everyone able to see my screen? Yes? Okay. Gonna do present. Awesome. Okay. So hi, everyone. Once again, thank you so much. And thank you, Naomi, for the lovely introduction. As Naomi mentioned, my name is Sophia Yang. My Chinese name is Yang Yacheng. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently situated on the traditional unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And today, my presentation is all about the history of Threading Change, how we started, its relationship to Waste Reduction Week and waste reduction in general, our relationship and how we're using a circular economy as a solution to combat fast fashion and gross consumption. And ways that we see a path forward when it comes to creating change in a world that really values consumption. As I mentioned just a little bit ago, to us, truth and reconciliation is an ongoing process. Most of our team members are currently based, actually, no, I shouldn't say that. Our paid staff, two of us are based in Vancouver. We have one paid staff member based on Anishinaabe land, Haudenosaunee Mississauga lands with the credit in Ontario as well. And we also have global volunteers that live in South Africa, Kenya, Brazil, India, Sri Lanka, Netherlands, Ecuador. So our volunteer base is pretty international. And for us, truth and reconciliation and paying respects to Indigenous people all around the world is incredibly important to us. So I'm going to start my presentation by telling you a story. This picture on the left, I took when I attended the United Nations Climate Conference. And I guess what I can start by saying, the way that I got into the climate world, my Chinese name Yang Yacheng, the Ya is Wen Ya and the Cheng is Gong Cheng. So my Chinese name literally translates to sophisticated engineer, because my hometown, which is called Daqing, which is a city in northern China, is where we discovered copious amounts of oil. And we moved to Calgary, Alberta when I was 8 years old, because that's a sister cities of my hometown. Instead of a sophisticated engineer, my parents got a loudmouth environmentalist. So sorry, mom and dad. There were many interesting conversations at dinner table because my parents are both obviously very, very pro pipeline because they're both oil and gas engineers. And meanwhile, I'm a climate activist. But I think having this upbringing really taught me to look at issues from various sides and not necessarily point fingers and put those on a different side as you in the corner and ostracize them. Because when you do that, you don't get people to agree on anything, rather you're just fighting. So I've always viewed my activism, in some ways, I started out as being a more lobbying approach, but later on, I've also done more corporate working internally approach. I always felt like I couldn't really find what exactly is my lime in a sea of lemons. I remember when I went to the UN Climate Conference in 2018, COP24, I was interested in so many topics: climate adaptation, renewable energy, indigenous people platforms. I couldn't really find what that true interest piece was. When I went in 2019 and I stumbled into the 1-year anniversary signing of the UN Sustainable Fashion Charter, which is this event right here that I took the photo of, I really saw clear before my eyes the clear intersections between fashion and climate, but also the huge inequities that persist that was very obvious to a lot of people, but no one was talking about it. When I was in the audience, I took this picture. I want you to look at this picture. What do you notice? Give everyone a little bit more time. I see that Mary's counting. Yeah, that's exactly what I do whenever I look at this picture. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it's 11, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. So out of 13 people on the stage, there was only one visible minority, which is this gentleman from China. And then there's also this lady from Turkey. But when they got up on the stage, they said, today we're here representing the global fashion industry. Is that so? If it's so global, how come all of you are pretty much from Europe or America? How come there's no one from the global South represented? And how come you don't have any garment workers or union workers represented, because they make up a large chunk of the fashion industry? And how come you're not addressing the human dimensions of fashion? And how come there's no young people represented when we're some of the largest consumers of fashion? And these are questions that swam through my mind and also many other people's mind as we were sitting for this conference. And it became really apparent to me when it was a Q&A period and a gentleman from Nigeria raised his hand and he said, you know, a lovely presentation. You talk a lot about climate sustainability and emissions reduction. I would like to ask you about financial sustainability. My wife works as a garment worker in Nigeria, and she makes very little, like not enough money to even have a living wage. The truck driver that drives the garments she makes from the warehouse to distribution center makes 5 times more than she does. What is the justification, and how are you ensuring that workers have a sustainable livelihood? And the panel didn't have an answer and kind of dodged the question. And for me, one of the first things they said was, this is the first time that there's been this great collaboration between industry and government. And we're here today to look at how we've done such a great job in reducing climatic emissions globally. It was the head of H&M who said that. And I thought it was really interesting because what they're basically saying is, look at us and how much great strides we made in emissions reduction when we are the ones that are actually our huge fast fashion conglomerates polluting most of the planet anyways. So it's not really anything revolutionary you're doing if you're just doing the bare minimum. It's equivalent if I spilled this cup of coffee and said, oh, look at me cleaning it up. And that is the essence of some of these agreements, is that they're really good at focusing on zoning on one thing while completely still participating in human rights violations, like Adidas is right now, not paying the workers properly, and also with body shaming, and also polluting waters all around the world, and also toxic waste dumping of textile waste. So from that moment on, I knew fashion was an incredibly intersectional issue, and at the world scale, there was no one really talking about it in that lens. So I knew something had to change. And this is a picture that I always show in my presentations. In 2016, the US imported almost 27 billion articles of clothing, and here are top 10 countries where these clothes came from. If you look at the map, what do you notice? Say the equator is around here, right? So what you'll notice is that most of these countries are in the global south. So you have mostly global representatives and brands calling the shots, making the decisions at these global conferences where policies are created. And yet where it's being produced and where it's being dumped is in the global south. In a really morbid way, fashion is circular because clothing is typically produced in countries like China, India, Cambodia, Vietnam, Bangladesh for a very cheap price. Then obviously the trends are mostly coming from Europe with big fashion houses, whether it's luxury fashion, H&M or Inditex that owns Zara. And then they're shipped to different places for editorial, magazine, and press. They're sold in stores all around the world. And currently Ghana, where Kataminto Market is where most of our clothing goes to waste. For a lot of clothes that doesn't get resold at Value Village, it doesn't get donated. It goes to a dumping ground. So our fashion ecosystem currently is circular in the worst way possible, and we're not holding big corporations accountable, and people are getting really sidelined by all the greenwashing that they're doing. And here's some other statistics. Fashion industry takes about approximately right now 10% of global CO2 emissions, contributes about 20% of global wastewater. There's a 36% decrease in the average number of times a clothing piece is worn, and that rate is going further, and that rate is climbing rapidly as fast fashion grows. 40% of clothing purchased in some countries are never even used. 7 million barrels of oil annually are used to make polyester fiber, and this number is actually from 2019, so it probably is much higher by now. And 95% of apparel that's thrown out is reusable or recyclable. So when it comes to waste and climate and sustainability, fashion has a huge problem. And as I mentioned previously, USA is the largest exporter and Ghana is the largest importer. The scale of the global North's waste is atrocious. The global garment production and its whole factory makes over $100 billion revenue a year, while its garment growers don't get paid. Zara is able to churn out 20,000 new designs a year. A brand like ASOS can churn out 7,000 styles per week. And a 2,000-person study conducted in UK showed that an average person only wears their clothes 7 times. And there's one garbage truck every second disposing clothing. So Americans and also North Americans also apply. Some of us dispose up to 80 or more pounds of clothing per year. And that statistic is also rapidly climbing. I mentioned a few times Ghana. So this is a Kataminto market in Ghana. It's actually a very lively and bustling hub. This is where a lot of the clothing that goes to the landfill ends up. Sometimes it get repurposed and resold. But we had a webinar in 2021 April for Fashion Revolution Week. We had researchers from the local Ghana University come and speak with us. And they essentially shed light in that the clothing they get is garbage. We are really treating the global south as dumping ground. The clothes they get have blood stains on them, tear stains on them, sometimes feces stains on them, and they expect to have them to get resold, to get repurposed. These are not going to be resold. The amount of resources it takes to resell it is far greater than it is to just put it in a landfill. We have to treat our clothing not as commodities, but view them as stories and see how we can pass it down from generation to generation instead of abusing them and utilizing consumption as an excuse to mask our real problems. And that's just a problem on a sustainability standpoint. This is one of my favorite pictures to ever exist. You might see why. Now I'm going to get into kind of the human rights and gender justice aspects of fashion. I think fashion is one of those industries. One of my favorite quotes is by Louis Perkins, who's head of the Apparel Impact Institute. Fashion's a Trojan horse of industries. It has all the same problems as every other industry, gross climatic emissions and pollution, toxic waste and dumping and affecting water ecosystems, mass consumption, gross amounts of waste, unfair labor, environmental toxins, and also human toxins. And yet it's hidden behind this veil of glitz and glamour, especially behind fashion shows and everything else that goes on. I know recently Bella Hadid had this Coperni dress that was spray on. The amount of news coverage that got compared to the last Bangladesh factory collapse that happened just a year ago, or compared to factory collapse that happened in Iran or Egypt, or even the amount of garment workers that don't get paid adequately in LA. The amount of news coverage that a model and a dress gets, more than human lives, millions of human lives of garment workers around the world, is appalling. It's really shameful, to be honest. All these garment workers really slaving away, which was happening in the Uyghur region, northern China right now. And we are so oblivious to it. And instead we choose to focus on Boxing Day deals and Black Friday deals. We have a problem in our society. Beyond that, fast fashion is a women's rights issue. For example, here's a case study of Bangalore. Violence against workers in Bangalore. 45 million people are employed in India's textile and clothing sectors. One in 7 women garment workers have been raped or forced to commit a sexual act. 1 in 14 women garment workers have experienced physical violence. 3.6% of action resulted in action factory by the police. And there was also 0% criminal charges brought on by the perpetrators. And in many cases, women also make disproportionately less money than their male counterparts in a lot of these factories. And this is interesting because this was me when I attended COP25 and I wrote this protest paper, not even knowing about the pay up campaign then, but I think it was meant to be. The Pay Up campaign was a campaign that was done by Remake Our World and Fashion Revolution that really shed light on why we need to pay workers' wages. And this problem became even more apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic when millions of garment workers lost their jobs with millions of canceled orders and didn't get paid and were pretty much forced out of labor. And in many circumstances, other people were forced to work in closed factories just in the pandemic, despite these really, really rough conditions. So there has been some light shed on this, but to this day, many of them still have not been paid adequately. And this is just part of the reasons why I want to start Threading Change and why I really wanted to shed light on this issue from an intersectional lens is that there's people around the world that are dying for fashion, and there's people around the world that have no way out. We've interviewed folks that work in Nepal that have been stuck in garment factories that didn't see a different future, but there definitely is, and there's other realms that they could also work in. But there's a lot of generational trauma and gaps that's happening right now in people not being able to leave. Fashion Revolution, which is a really great global not-for-profit, has provided resources for garment workers on help on how to unionize, but at the global world stage or in terms of policymaking, they're still not adequately represented, which is something that we're trying to change, and I'm working on doing so. And so Threading Change was born. We officially launched 2 years ago on September 30th, 2020. Our mission is the 6Fs, which is a feminist, fossil fuel-free fashion future. So really touching on that climate justice, gender justice, and also racial justice component. Here's our beautiful team. Here's myself. We have our Global Innovation Story Map coordinator. Isabel is our communication policy coordinator. Sarah is our manager. On the corners, we have our 5 board members, and all of our board members are women of color who are from countries that are very garment focused. So these places include Sri Lanka, India, Vietnam, and Bangladesh. And we're so incredibly lucky to have them and for them to share their perspectives with us. And all the other folks around the corner here are our global volunteers. So some people from Amsterdam, Ecuador, Africa, India, around the world, which has been really great to work with them on various projects. Our values as an organization is 5-fold. We uphold intersectionality. We place people before profits. We are youth-led and youth-driven. We center underrepresented voices, and we also believe in strong, meaningful collaboration. A bit about what we do, as I'm sure maybe some of you already know, we have something called a tri-impact model. So the first part of that is education awareness. We have a global webinar series called Textile Talks with a different focus area each season. Our next one is on October 25th, focus on circular economy and life cycle analysis of clothing in honor of Circular Economy Month. So pretty excited about that. The second part of our tri-impact model is innovation. So we have something called the Global Innovation Story Map. And what it essentially is a global innovation database that details some of the most promising and ethical brands in the world, most of them being small to medium-sized enterprises or SMEs. And the reason why we did this is because when I was at the COP conference, I recognized that most of the companies getting the majority of the airtime were huge fashion conglomerates that had the finance and resources to do so. But there were so many other brands and smaller brands that were really doing amazing things that weren't getting an airtime. So this year, we'll be attending COP27 in Egypt and taking some of their stories there. Consultation is our last pillar. So we do youth engagement and consulting, so workshops, policy jams, and also working with other brands. Right now, we are doing some work with Patagonia, which has been really exciting, and also Northwest Skills to help more young people in BC and Vancouver break into the textiles industry. And then last but not least, also research and policy, connecting the ties of the fashion industry to different UN SDGs. We're currently working on a research and policy paper project on how we can utilize the UN SDGs in a better way to help fashion change making. And we have students from Stellenbosch University in South Africa, University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and also São Paulo University in Brazil, helping us on that project. So if you ever interested in researching anything about fashion policy or to get involved, feel free to email us. I can drop my email in the chat. There's always many opportunities available. This is just like some examples of what we've done. So this is a webinar series that we did in April 2021 in honor of Fashion Revolution Week. We called it Clothes Busters. So fashion trends are about to be busted, really shedding light on popular myths and trends in the industry. One of them being that a lot of clothing that you donate gets resold. It doesn't, it goes to the landfill. And then here's a campaign that we did on that, which is just asking, are my clothes harmful? I'm going to actually, I think it's easier if I show you the story map. So as I mentioned, this is a global innovation story map. it loads. There's different categories. So it could be, you know, accessories, 1% for the planet. You can scroll to any of this. This is an amazing indigenous brand. There's more information about the brand, the website. You can also get inspiration and hear about how this brand came about. And for those that are members, there's also discount codes that you can have for these different brands. And to date, we have profiled 75 brands from all around the world and taking 15 of them to COP. If you have a brand you'd like to recommend, you can also put that on our website. You can go down. This is the intake form on how you can suggest different brands. If you have a brand that you think is doing really cool work, we definitely welcome any thoughts on them. You can either navigate this through looking through the map, or you can navigate this through looking in different categories. It's really up to you. Another one of my favorite ones is also if you go into the gender fluid clothing. For example, this is a really amazing brand, Rewelt Kids, one of the champions of our story map, creating gender neutral clothing that's sustainable, recyclable, with highly aligned mission and values, or using all biocompostable fibers. Sasha is amazing. We've collaborated on a few different projects, and you can click into and find out more about their brand, which is really exciting to be able to convene on these different brands and hear and be able to share their stories. Okay, back to presentation mode I go. Lastly, in terms of consulting and also doing some of these policy jams, this is a Women's History Month workshop that we conducted for Women's History on Women's Day on that month, March 16th, on how to plan and conduct a gender inclusive project. And the reason why we did this is because working in the fashion industry, I'm going to be honest, I think there's a little bit of misconception about the type of person that works in this realm. Usually people think it's women, a lot of times it's white women, many times people think it's girly. But if you really think about the fashion industry, it's not girly at all. Out of the top 10 CEOs, the biggest companies, only one CEO is female. That's Helena from H&M. And out of the highest earning paid CEOs and shop owners in fashion, none of them are female. There's actually a lot of exploitation industry that happens to female individuals. So we kind of wanted to take that and have a different spin on it, in that it's not a girly industry by any means. In fact, let's make it more gender inclusive and really fight that narrative. So this is a project that we did. And we have tons of these different policy jams as well. So this one that we did, get the different rooms, how to plan gender inclusive project, everything from project planning to ways you can make people feel comfortable, to ways that you can test out the project afterwards and see if there's any changes, to ways where you're careful about language and confirmation bias and different type of biases when you are conducting a project. So this is one that we did. I just talked about the story map. Something else that we did last year was the Global Youth on Fashion Survey, when we were asked to speak at the UN Sustainable Fashion Alliance event. We conducted the survey and had over 300 responses from youth from 45 different countries on what fashion really means to them. And what we realized, and this is some stats about what we did, 3 countries, 7 continents, 206 responses, 20 plus youth organizing represented, and most of them being younger folks that are 18 to 24 years old. And here's something that we found. On a scale 1 to 10, how would you rate your understanding sustainable fashion? Most people having a pretty good understanding. How often do you think about the environmental and social consequences of the fashion as current rate of production? Daily, 30%, that's pretty good. Wow. Weekly, rarely, not too many people. So there's definitely more interest building in the area. And also, have you made personal changes in your life to limit your fashion consumption since the COVID-19 pandemic started? And most people said yes, which is great. But I think we're kind of falling back into old patterns again with the rise of some really big fast fashion brands. And then we asked, what issue in the current fashion industry do you think needs to change? And a lot of them are overwhelmingly environmentally related. So fashion's carbon footprint, environmental impact, but then modern slavery also got a lot of votes, lack of transparency, and all of the above, for it is an intersectional issue. But what this tells us at the time that we did this survey is that it's easier for people to grapple with the environmental impact of fashion more than it is to think about the human dimensions impacts of fashion. And from the research we've done and work that we've done, I'm not surprised. I think in many circumstances, the climate justice and the waste reduction topic, in many aspects, is easier to grasp because you feel like you yourself can make a tangible difference by buying less things, by swapping things. We're just buying nothing. But when it comes to some of the human rights violations, it can seem like such a big problem that is very complex, you know how to grasp. So part of our work at Threading Change is deciphering how can you make an impact as an individual that's beyond just buying less things. Because if the only way you as an individual is buying less things, that means you're a consumer, you're not an individual. And there's much more you can do than just voting with your dollars. For we really strongly do believe that. So a lot of our work really centers around the other solutions that also exist out there, which I will touch on very soon. So into the solutions, Fashion Revolution Week this year was really great because it birthed something really big for us. Here's some of the events that we did. We had a youth in fashion policy workshop where we convened several different fashion organizations to talk about what fashion means to them. We had different breakout rooms. We also had one that we did with Clean Clothes Campaign and also a Fair Wear Foundation that was talking about redistributing money and power in the fashion industry, which is a theme of the Fashion Revolution Week this year. I'm gonna see if there's a way that I could show you guys something about this policy workshop. But while I get that up, I think there's some questions. Does anyone want to ask some questions? This might be a good time as I get the next slide.
Yeah, so Cecilia had a question about where all of our secondhand clothing was getting dumped. So she wrote in the chat, if Ghana is the second importer of used clothes, who is the first?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure, but I feel like it might be China. I think it's China. Yeah. But I might almost have to look that up. Maybe someone can confirm or not confirm that. The statistics are always changing, which is a big problem in the fashion industry. There's also statistics that you say so one point that was correct and the next point is no longer correct. I will say, when you talk about statistics in the fashion industry, you have to be careful not to say in absolutes. There's a lot of people saying like fashion is the top 3 polluting industries in the world. It depends on how you're calculating that. If you're calculating like the amount of water waste, the amount of gross emissions, or the amount of water pollution, in some instances it might be, but then compared to other industries, it's really that like gross emission that comes into it. And a lot of countries and also brands are not reporting accurately on where the clothes are going or what's actually being emitted. So it can be difficult to get the right information at different times. Is there another question?
There is another question. So Cecilia again is asking, is there a trace of where the unsold clothes in thrift stores in the Lower Mainland go? Is this information public? So she wrote me an email earlier too, and is kind of just wondering, is there a way for us, like when we donate clothing somewhere, is there a way for us to see where those clothes get dumped to if they don't get sold at the thrift store?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's goes to a landfill. To be quite honest with you. And now, you know, I don't, for those that live in Vancouver, you might know the Valley Village on Hastings burned down. So that was a place I was taking a lot of clothing donations. They mostly go to the landfill. Metro Vancouver has released the Think Thrice campaign in the last couple of years to raise more awareness about swapping and buying less. But to this day, there's very, very little government and regulation regarding the amount of clothes that goes into the landfill. Textile Lab for Circularity is a great organization startup in Vancouver that's actively working on how we can diminish textile waste by repurposing clothing. But one of the biggest issues in the current fashion sector in Vancouver, but also globally, is the fact that there's a huge ping-ponging of responsibility when it comes to textile waste. Local municipal government think that the provincial government or the state government, in the case of UK, should be the ones that are mandating stricter laws for dumping textiles and what can and cannot be used. Meanwhile, state and provincial governments think that it's the local municipality's responsibility to accurately decipher their waste and figure out what and cannot be used. And what's happening while they're having this game of back and forth is that clothing are just going to a landfill anyway. And a lot of big processing plants don't like recycling or dealing with textiles because if the garment of clothing has like sequins or feathers or lots of other types of materials, it can get stuck in the machinery they have when they're turning down other items. So it can be a little bit difficult for them. Some really sustainable companies like Arc'teryx are finding it very difficult to properly recycle their clothing. So if you've been to an Arc'teryx warehouse in North Van, they actually have an entire warehouse that's full of jackets that have been returned or jackets that get repurposed because they can't recycle it because it's full of Gore-Tex and polyester and other types of materials. There's a lot of different startups right now working on true textile recycling, but due to the nature of the different combinations of materials present in one singular item of clothing, it has proven to be quite challenging. So the short answer is, it likely a lot of it is going to a landfill, but the good answer is, with more awareness, more education, and more events that I'm going to talk about, I think people are now better at holding on to pieces or repurposing them or reusing them and not buying new things, but also recognizing that they want to be part of the solution. So there's more schools teaching about textile recycling, materiality, materials engineering, but it does take a lot of folks together to actively, because a lot of brands, what they want to do is make money. If customers are demanding better quality clothing, better materials, are truly recyclable, and refuse to buy anything else, that's what they have to shift to. For example, Shein, which is a huge fast fashion conglomerate, they're like the worst fast fashion brand in the history of fast fashion brands. They actually recently approached my other work, Canopy, to sign a forest conservation policy, and they approached us. So it's showing that these brands are understanding that the political climate about sustainability is changing and is no longer people, planet, profit. It's also people, planet, profit proof. The triple bottom line is becoming the quadruple bottom line. So business is changing. Is it changing at a rate that's fast enough? I don't think so. So that was a very long answer. I think I found what I'm trying to find. So one sec.
Sure. If I may, just really quick, I think you kind of answered my question as well in relation to the recycling of clothing. And so I know that the return at depots, some of them used to accept textiles, but as of June 30th, they stopped. So is there somewhere else where we can take clothing to be recycled? Because I mean, I take the good things for donations, but there's things that, shouldn't be reused as clothing anymore. They need to be recycled into something else. So is there currently somewhere else to take those items or not yet?
Yeah, I would say Fab Cycle in Chinatown is really good. They take fabric scraps and they make it and repurpose it into other elements. Our social fabric sometimes also takes fabric scraps for designers that are in their programs, but that's not all the time. I would say another thing that you could do is talk to people in different schools and different programs. That's something we're currently doing right now, is we're mapping out like a textile recycling chain of Vancouver while also mapping out different businesses. There's many instances where students in different programs, whether it's the Wilson School of Design at KPU, Emily Carr, or other fashion schools, or LaSalle College, that are interested in using fabric scraps to make different items, and sometimes even home ec teachers want them. So really see how you can repurpose it and make it circular within the educational system. And a lot of it also takes writing letters to Metro Vancouver and our governments for saying, we want there to be a place to recycle textiles. We want there to be a place where there's an education center, and it's beyond just, because what happens with textiles and any type of recycling is I have this thing and it's like, this is my responsibility. And then the second I recycle and get rid of it, I'm like, okay, and now I'm absolved of any guilt with this thing, even though it was my waste. From a policy lens, what really needs to happen is there needs to be EPR policy, which stands for Extended Producer Responsibility Policy. If H&M made the sweater, then H&M is responsible to properly dispose and recycle of it. But the issue is that we're not putting these brands and holding them accountable for the gross amount of waste that they produce. Sweden has successfully mandated EPR in some jurisdictions. And you know who's been a leader in this space is actually IKEA, out of a lot of people, right? Because with one of the furniture take back programs. So on an individual level, I think doing that research and talking to people in schools and taking things recycling, that's the one part. But I implore you to not forget the really important policy shift and the societal shift that needs to happen. And a lot of that can be mandated in the upcoming Vancouver municipal election. I won't say who to vote for, but I will say a lot of folks on the Green Party have done really good work for circular economy. And I think like that stance is also possible in thinking about how we can change it from a systemic lens. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly share my screen and finish this part of the presentation.
Awesome. What was the name of that EPR what was that abbreviation?
EPR policy, extended producers. That's what it is. I'm trying. Let me find this. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I found it. Oof. I was like, I cannot find it. Okay, give me one sec. So this is what I'm talking about. So this is a mural that we conducted, that we created for when we did the youth in fact. By the way, this is my email. So if you want to get in touch about volunteering, different events, if you have a question, feel free to reach out there. Or you can email me at sophia@threateningchange.org. It goes to the same place. Okay, so this is mural. I'm sure probably some of you have heard it before. This is what we did. This is our youth in fashion policy jam that we did for Fashion Revolution Week in April. And what this essentially is that this is thinking how to mend the gaps within the fashion industry through legislation and policy framework. So it was a great question, Naomi, to kind of go into this. And the reason why we did this was because, we've been to so many panels talking to experts, and so many times they're like, buy less clothes, shop less, swap. And it's like, okay, I'm already doing that, but like, you're still treating me like as the only thing I can do is just spend less money, like just as a consumer. How do I get engaged as a citizen? And we knew young people had some really great ideas because we're consumers of fashion, but also because, we're young and bright and we're innovative. So this really was an intro to legislation policy solutions to see how we can keep the fashion industry transparent, accountable throughout the supply chain. So what we did, because we wanted to be a big collaboration, is we got together the youth representatives from one of the biggest fashion organizations in the world. We have Remake Our World, Fashion Revolution, Youth for Fashion for Climate Action, Fashion Takes Action, and also Shaping Fashion. So FTA was in Toronto, YFCA was in Amsterdam, Remake was in New York, Fashion Revolution, we got someone from the UK to join us, Shaping Fashion, David was from Uganda. So very global representation over here. And each of these groups was responsible for being the lead of one breakout room. So we talked everything about accountability and transparency, inclusive policy making, EPR policy, which I just talked about, consumer producer responsibility policy, labor legislation, fair pay, and also the EU textiles policy. And this was a great session that authored a really interesting brief. And what we realized from this is that we have the resources, we have the knowledge as young people, we have the backing to support us, whether it's people in different universities or institutions. The three main things we're missing is finance. Young people are always getting asked for free to do things for free, whether it's sharing their opinion about something or not having enough funding to actually make a report happen, because there's so many hours that goes into a lot of volunteer and work goes into that. The second thing is that in many industries, and same with the fashion industry, the EU is leading the conversation in a lot of ways. The EU just released a policy in March, April this year that was really targeting emissions of some of the biggest fast fashion brands in the world. So this includes H&M and also Zara and Levi's, although they're not as much fast fashion. But they also had policy about fashion repair and the amount that each person is allowed to dispose of. So the EU is really leading in this realm, which is really exciting. But this goes into the same issue as climate finance, and also with the issue of COP, is when you compare the policies of two different countries, one being a global south and one being a global north, there's many circumstances where you can't really do a head-to-head comparison, because the global north has been extracting resources from the global south for decades, for centuries. It's not the same level of questions you have to ask. But what ends up happening is a lot of people place these blanket statements and blanket policies across a jurisdiction. And how a company operates in the EU versus how they operate in another area is not applicable. But the problem is they're still viewing Europe as a main example here. So we want to, as young people, to figure out how we can actually participate in inclusive policymaking, which Room 2 was talking about, and make sure that it's tailored towards each country's and also each brand's needs, because a lot of these brands are coming from different places. And that got us into conversation talking about labor legislation and fair pay. There is no centralized place other than some lobbyist organizations that are actively examining how there's a lot of human rights violations in certain places. But what ends up happening is that these different organizations are examining human rights violations are then subjected to getting funding from big foundations and corporations that could also be equally corrupt. So not-for-profit cycle repeats itself. It's a really interesting case study that we conducted, and the takeaway is we're all doing really good work and there needs to be more collaboration, but you cannot forget young people, and you need to make sure that an intersectional application on fashion is always apparent. And will be a lot of these things I just reiterated will be presented our policy brief at COP27, in which we're also collaborating with the global fashion agenda on. So that'll be really exciting. I can send the link to Naomi. She can distribute it when that time comes. Okay, back to the presentation. I'll finish this and I'll do the questions later. One sec. Okay, so that was a big spiel. I just talked about the Youth and Fashion Policy Workshop. But the reason why this event series was really great was because we tried something different. We're like, you know what, we've been doing a lot of online events, pardon me. COVID is now lessening. Maybe we should try doing an in-person event, right? So in Vancouver, you could do in-person events again. So we decided to do an in-person clothing swap. But because I'm also a DJ and I run a music collective, we added in music and food and swapping. And it was very successful. Our first event had over 200 people. And then we printed out these posters. And if you read, it says, have you ever considered what happens to your clothes after you donate them? Or is it out of sight, out of mind? The truth is, we can't blame you. Only 1% of textiles around the world are recycled properly, and the dominant fashion system is a waste crisis that is often mystified and now even romanticized by many global North brands. Key word is romanticized. I've seen this conscious collection, go green is in, like all these advertisements that's like luscious forests and big Monstera leaves and wow, recycled material. This was made out of plastic water bottles. And it's like, how much are you actively putting in next generation materials and developing better material solutions and working with innovators to actually create more sustainable clothing? Because part of sustainability is degrowth. And part of that is addressing that our rate of production right now and rate of consumption cannot keep up with planetary boundaries. It simply cannot. The waste problem is so vast. I want you each right now quickly to close your eyes, okay, close your eyes, and just think to yourself, how many articles of clothing do you have? And I want you to count also socks and underwear and shoes. Just think about it. As like an average person living in Vancouver, BC, or in the Lower Mainland, because I have a lot of clothing. And now I want you to take that number and just multiply that by 7 billion people in the world. Now, obviously, not every person has as much clothing as we do, but there's some people that could have more than that. So just give or take. And just think about how many articles of clothing there are that already we own, how many articles there are in a landfill, how many articles there are in the warehouses and the workshops, and how many there are that are yet to be sold, and how many are yet to be created. We don't need more clothes. We have a huge waste problem. So what we did was we did clothing swaps, and we did them all around the world. We did them in Vancouver, we did them in Calgary, we did them in Toronto, we did them in Ecuador, we did them in South Africa, we did them in Kenya, we did them in Ghana, we did them in India, we did them in Amsterdam. And sometimes they were also happening simultaneously. And we combined music and ideation jams and people talking about the issue. We talked about the policy instruments from those 5 breakout rooms I showed earlier at each and every clothing swap, almost each and every clothing swap. We got a conversation going about, you're swapping. Do you know what EPR is? You're swapping. Do you know what fair labor is? You're swapping. Do you know what XYZ is? And what we realized is that so many people wanted to get into sustainable fashion, but didn't know where to start. And so many people felt like we did, that the only thing they could do was buy less, but I knew that there was more. I'm going to show a video. Hope my sound works. Of our swaps. This girl made a TikTok for us and it blew up, so very thankful.
Come with me to a clothing swap in Vancouver. This was hosted by Fred and Change in East Van. All you had to do was bring in some pre-loved clothing and they would give you some tickets for somebody else's pre-loved clothing. And I brought in 26 pieces, so I got 26 tickets. And each ticket represented one item, and they told me if I didn't use them all this time, I can bring it back for their next event. I found so many great items. First, this top and dress combo that sort of reminded me of Durf Avenue pieces. And then these dad-adjacent cargo shorts, love them. And these brown trousers, and then this bell bottom that I'm trying very hard to show you. And this gorgeous red cardigan. And then this gorgeous Speak Now era dress. Didn't try it on, didn't care. I knew I was getting it. This was so much fun, and I love that they made sustainable fashion more accessible. Come with me to a clothing swap.
So that was our first clothing swap, and it was very successful. So we decided to do more. We now have a page on our website if you'd like to hear about the next ones about our global clothing swaps. This is a video that we had from our last one. This is just like a time lapse, but this is the one that we did in Vancouver. And every table, there was a conversation about how you can make sustainable fashion more accessible and how you can participate in this as not just a consumer, but also as a citizen. And to us, that's the ultimate success, to make young people feel like they have agency, they have ownership, they can change the world, even if it's just by not buying something, but also the conversations that we're able to have with tons of young people around the world. We've engaged thousands of young people now through these swaps, and seeing what's possible. I'm almost done blabbing, I swear. Okay, so upcoming events. Our next event is in person. It's Tuesday, October 18th. We will be collaborating with Patagonia. We're going to be doing a clothing and gear swap at their store on West 4th. If you are close to Vancouver, we want to come. There'll be music, DJs, food, and it's a gear swap. So if you like snowboarding, skiing, winter sports, this is the event for you. You can come meet our team in person, ask questions. We can geek out about fashion. I can give you a sticker. It'll be great. And then we're also doing a clothing swap and maker market on the 22nd in our studio. This is the same studio where we've done a lot of our clothing swaps. It'll be from 5 to 9 p.m. There'll be drinks, kombucha, food. It's a fundraiser gala to mostly fundraise money for our Wayblaze campaign that we're doing right now. So I would highly encourage everyone to come. Our Wayblaze campaign is, I'll go back to that later, is this, where did it go? Here. We're needing some help to fund the Global Innovation Story Map to take some of these stories to COP, and our fundraising goal is 15,000. We just released it recently, so we haven't gotten any donations yet. If you're interested in our work, if you're passionate about our work, we would really appreciate your support. If you don't want to donate, that's okay too. Sharing the campaign and telling people about us would also really help a lot. So the fundraiser is really to try and raise more money for the Wayblaze campaign. And join our team. We're always looking for volunteers. Right now, we're looking for some business and grant team volunteers if you like writing grants. We're looking for research and policy volunteers to help us finish a policy brief for going to COP. And we're also right now hiring for 2 paid positions, which is a business development manager and then also our communications engagement manager role, because our amazing comms manager, Isabel, just went back to school. So it's a thing that happens a lot of not-for-profits. So if you're interested, you can go on our website and there's more information on the roles available. You do have to be between 15 to 30 just because of the fundraising restriction. I'm sorry about that. But if that suits you and you're interested, or if you want to share with your friends, definitely let us know. And here's just more information about the jobs board where you can find more info. And with that, I think that's it. I would love to keep the conversation growing. You can email me at hello or sophia@threadingchange.org. All of our socials is just Threading Change. You can also see it on the website. We also have a newsletter, so if you sign up, you'll get monthly updates. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening.
All right. Thank you so much, Sophia. That was a ton of information to hammer into our short time together. And I learned a lot, and I'm really inspired. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we did a clothing swap yesterday, and I loved the idea of you combining it with like dance and music and other events, you know, not making it not just about the clothing, but to really bring in more people. I thought that was fantastic. There is another question here in the chat. I'll read out, which is, where do you do your presentations? Are they at high schools, public libraries?
Great question. Yeah, this is one of them. So thanks, Naomi, for having me. We've collaborated a lot with Mulgrave School and also Insight Global Education. So we have done quite a few with grade 5 students up to grade 10 students. I have also given SDG, a circular economy project planning presentations a few times to grade 11 and 12 students, and how to start your own creative project and ways that you can measure impact. So we do have like a slew of different topics that we cover that's beyond just fashion. I'll drop a link right here in the chat that goes into some of our educational programs if you're interested in those. Maybe I'll share my screen just because I am a big fan of sharing my screen. So anything, oh, it's a bit frozen. There you go. Yeah, so anything ranging from impact projects to workshops, talking about like knowing your fabrics, what is modern slavery, indigenous fashion. These are all resources that we previously talked about. And we also have workshops about SDGs and ways that we can utilize that to combat fast fashion. And then in terms of talks, we've done them pretty all across the board. We've done talks with UBC Sustainability, SFU, City of Vancouver. In-person ones are mostly based in Vancouver, but then for online, it can really be anywhere. And we actually have people on our team that have been interested in getting more into public speaking. So, if you're a volunteer with us, you can also represent us and speak on a topic. For example, Janet, who's our Africa Regional Coordinator, she's freaking amazing. She just spoke on 3 panels in the last month about African fashion and how they're grappling with textile waste and textile recycling. And she'll be attending COP because COP is in Africa this year, so it's a big highlight and spotlight on that. So there's tons of opportunities. We are actually at a point right now where we don't take on every speaking opportunity as much as we used to. We always make room for young people though, like that's our jam, and students. So if you'd like to learn more, you can definitely check out those different resources that I sent. But if you have an idea where we can speak, we're always here to hear feedback. The link that I shared has more information how you can get in contact with us about that.
Awesome. So many ways to get involved. Does anybody else have any questions for Sophia or comments you'd like to share at this time? Feel free to unmute or pop them into the chat. All right. Well, and if you think of anything later on, of course, you can always email me or Sophia. I can forward things on to Sophia for questions that you have for her as well. And so I guess at this point, I want to thank you all for joining us and expanding our minds and our knowledge about the fast fashion industry and some of the more positive things that are happening to help change this industry for the better. And I'm really glad, Sophia, that you talked a lot about other things that we can do, because I was kind of like how you said, the things I always heard were shop less, do the swaps, donate. So it's really nice to have those other options as well. So thank you all so much for joining. I'm going to hit stop record and enjoy the rest of your long weekend.